Alex and Dorothy had been living together for over 10 years. Their relationship seemed perfect. A strong marriage, 2 children, a comfortable life. They had built this world step by step, supporting each other and believing in the future. However, one day life presented a challenge that made Dorothy see her life in a new light. It happened when she went on a business trip to another city. Dorothy had long been accustomed to the rhythm of business trips, new cities, new faces, ever-changing meetings. But this city felt different. Its atmosphere, its noise and movement seemed to hold her captive. She was here for work, leaving behind her usual life in search of new opportunities. All her energy was focused on business, but something inside her, like a lost part of her soul, seemed eager to break free. After another meeting, when her mind was full of numbers and plans, Dorothy decided to take a walk around the city center to clear her head. The bustling streets, the crowds of people, the shops, every corner seemed like a place for new discoveries. But amidst all the hustle and bustle, among faces she didn't know, she unexpectedly ran into him. Dorothy, her name was spoken in a familiar voice, and her heart skipped a beat. There he was, James, her first love. His gaze was the same as it had been many years ago, and his smile that same warm, mysterious smile she remembered, as if it had never been said goodbye, never been forgotten. The time that had passed seemed to mean nothing. Suddenly, everything was back in place. James, she asked in surprise, unable to hide the rush of emotions that overwhelmed her. It felt like meeting a ghost from the past. He was standing before her, but everything felt so vivid, so real. He hadn't changed, or maybe it was just that she saw him through the eyes of the Dorothy she once was. He smiled a little wider, and something in his gaze told her that it, too, hadn't been ready for this meeting. You're here, in this city. His voice was slightly tense, as if he were trying to believe what was happening. Dorothy didn't answer right away. Her mind was spinning with thoughts. How did they end up here? How had they suddenly found themselves together after all these years apart? Yes, on business, she said, trying to hide the wave of nostalgia that swept over her. It was the truth. She was here for work, not to seek out encounters with the past. James took a small step closer. His gaze softened. He had always been so attentive, and as she suddenly realized this, she felt something stir inside her. So, how are you? How's life? He asked, and she realized he wasn't just asking out of politeness. He genuinely wanted to know. Dorothy sighed softly. There was so much she couldn't explain, so many experiences that had become part of her life over the years. But in that moment, with him standing there, everything now seemed to lose its significance. Everything's fine, she said, smiling. Work, projects, but I don't get to be in places like this often. How about you? He was silent for a moment, as if collecting his thoughts, and then said, I'm the same. Everything's the same. But probably not quite, he added with a light chuckle that seemed both confident and a little sad. Dorothy felt the words on her tongue grow heavy, as if they could ruin this moment, but James suddenly suggested, how about we grab a coffee? I know a great place here. I can show you. She hesitated, but only for a moment. Something inside her was drawn to the offer, to the memories of a time when everything had been simpler, when they were both young and believed in the future. Okay, she agreed, feeling her heart begin to race. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a chance to look again into the eyes of the person with whom she once shared dreams and hopes. They walked down the street, and everything around them seemed to slow down. For Dorothy, this moment felt like a portal to the past, to the days when the world seemed so open and each day was full of new possibilities. But now, after so many years, it was no longer just a memory. It was the present, which might open new chapters in their story. The conversation between them flowed easily, as if no years had passed, recalling old jokes, casually discussing mutual friends and events that once filled their days. They once again felt the special connection that had existed between them. Every glance, every gesture from James seemed familiar, yet new, like everything was beginning to bloom again, but with a layer of maturity that both of them had gained over the years of separation. Dorothy felt forgotten emotions, once experienced with him, return. They had been young and full of hope when they dreamed of the future, and now, after all these years, she once again felt the same ties that had once bound them: tenderness, passion, and a light excitement. It seemed time didn't matter when they were together. Do you remember how we used to walk along the waterfront at night? James said, almost casually, but with a smile full of memories. Dorothy quietly nodded, feeling her heart tighten. She remembered every detail of those walks whole Saturday on a bench, watched the reflection of the moon in the water, shared their dreams, laughed, and joked. That was back when the future seemed limitless. Of course, I remember, she replied, then paused. So much has changed since then. But James didn't let them fall into the depths of nostalgia. He suggested, "How about we take another walk? I know a place where the night is especially beautiful, just like before. Ain't no plans, no expectations." She wanted to say something that would remind him of her life, of her current worries, of the work waiting for her tomorrow. But despite all these thoughts, the words didn't come. Her body was drawn to him, as if an invisible thread connected them. Everything that mattered now seemed less important than what once was. She couldn't resist. She simply walked. The night embraced the city, and the streets, full of lights, became their personal world, where time and obligations didn't exist. James walked beside her, and they were once again those young people who once dreamed of the future without thinking about the obstacles. "You know I've always loved you," he said, when they found themselves in the shadow of one of the old buildings. He said it calmly, as if it were something self-evident, but his voice carried such sincerity that Dorothy felt her chest tighten. Dorothy felt a light flare up in her soul, a light she had long forgotten, but with that light came a feeling of loss, as if she was returning to that moment when their parting had been inevitable. I loved you too," she whispered, though the words sounded like an apology, like an acknowledgment of what had been and what hadn't come to be. The dreams they built disappeared like morning fog, leaving only memories. They stopped by the old bridge that connected the two banks of the river, and for a moment, everything around them disappeared. Dorothy felt the scent of the night, fresh and full of promises. James' gaze was fixed on her face, and she couldn't understand what he saw in her eyes. The same Dorothy he once loved, or the woman who had already been through so much and changed. "What if we hadn't parted?" he asked, as if answering her silence. Dorothy looked at him and felt her inner world stir. Those words didn't demand an answer, because perhaps they both knew the past couldn't be returned to. But despite that, they were both here, in the night, in this new city, where their lives had crossed once again. "We can't go back, James," she said softly, "but that doesn't mean we can't start something new." His gaze softened, and he moved a little closer to her. "You're right," he whispered, and perhaps there was a hint of something more in those words, the possibility of a new beginning. But they both understood that their lives had long gone in different directions. All that was left were the memories, which, in this moment, had come to life once more. The night stretched on, and the air was filled with the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Time seemed to elongate, and every moment with James became more and more significant. Dorothy felt her heart fill again with emotions she had long considered forgotten. She couldn't exactly say what drew her to him. Perhaps it was simple nostalgia, or maybe something much deeper, invisible yet real. They stood by the bridge, and James seemed in no rush to look away from her. It felt like an incomplete memory, one that still demanded closure, but Dorothy knew that no words could fully express what she was feeling at that moment. "We can't go back to the past," she repeated, though not entirely convinced by her own words. She was searching for answers, and despite all her turmoil, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was right in front of her. James sighed. His gaze deepened, and there was a quiet sadness in his voice. "Maybe we can't," he said, tilting his head slightly, "but don't you think it's worth trying to understand what might have been, if we hadn't let each other go so soon?" Dorothy fell silent, her thoughts tangled. Were they really ready to continue together? She wasn't sure. She already had her life, her family, her role, but something in James' words made her question whether she was truly happy. She still didn't know what she felt, but she knew that this moment, this meeting, would be something significant for her. "You didn't just happen to show up here, did you?" she asked finally, as if trying to understand herself. "This isn't a coincidence." James was quiet for a moment, then shrugged, as if deciding to share a part of his thoughts with her. "Maybe not," he said, with a slight smile, "but something inside me told me I had to meet you again, that we needed to talk. I don't know exactly what it was, but that feeling hasn't left me all this time." Dorothy felt a flutter in her chest. His words sounded so sincere that she couldn't ignore them. They were both searching for something they might not have been able to find in their current lives. But what was it? Wanting to reclaim lost dreams, or a chance for a new beginning? "What if we just let ourselves feel this moment, without thinking about the future?" James suggested, his voice soft and certain. Dorothy looked at him, and a flicker of doubt passed through her eyes, but not fear. She understood that all they could do was be honest with themselves and each other. Whatever path their lives would take, this meeting had already changed them. She couldn't deny it. "All right," she said, a slight smile appearing on her face. "Let's not think about anything else." They stood on the bridge, looking at the river, listening to the hum of the city around them, and feeling how this moment filled their souls. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a decision. It was simply a moment when the destinies crossed again, and the world, for a brief instant, became simple and clear. That evening, they didn't search for answers to the questions that troubled them. They were just there, as they had been in those distant days when everything seemed possible. And perhaps this was exactly what both of them had been missing, the simple feeling, when there was no need to choose, but just a space to stop, feel, and look at life without rushing. Dorothy returned home to Alex, but her thoughts remained with James. Once back in the familiar surroundings, she felt that her previous life had become flat, devoid of vibrancy. Every day spent with Alex and the children filled her with guilt and anxiety. She knew that her actions could destroy everything, and now she had to decide how to move forward. But the question wasn't only about that. What was more important, family and loyalty, or the rekindled passion she felt with James? The days passed in routine. Alex, it seemed, didn't notice any changes in her behavior, continuing to immerse himself in work and household chores. He was a caring husband and loving father, but more and more, Dorothy felt as if an invisible wall had appeared between them. She tried to stay present, but her thoughts often drifted to those warm memories left by James. In his eyes, she saw not only a piece of the past, but also something alive, something missing from her current life. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Dorothy and Alex sat her down for dinner. The atmosphere was calm, but an indistinct sense of unease hung in there, as though an important conversation had been left unspoken. Alex put down his fork and looked at her, his eyes full of concern, but also expectation. "You don't seem like yourself," he said quietly. "Is everything okay, Dorothy?" She couldn't answer right away. The words caught in her throat. She knew she couldn't continue hiding her feelings, but she wasn't ready to open up. Everything she felt seemed complicated and unresolved. "Yeah, everything's fine," she replied, trying to smile, but her voice sounded distant, and Alex noticed it. "Are you sure? You've been distant. If something's bothering you, you can talk. We're family. We should be honest with each other," he said, tilting his head slightly, as if trying to decipher her inner world. Her heart tightened. She could tell him everything, but she wasn't ready to destroy what they had built together. At some point, it seemed to her that if she opened this door, they would all be standing at the threshold of something irreversible. "I'm just tired," she answered, looking up at him. "Work, the house, you know how it is." Alex nodded, but her answer didn't convince him. He could see something was wrong, but didn't know how to react. He wasn't prepared to face the reality she was experiencing. Dorothy, in turn, couldn't bring herself to tell the truth. She was afraid that if it all came out, she would lose everything she had: stability, love, family. After dinner, she got up and went to her room. Lying in bed, she tried to sleep, but her thoughts again returned to James. What was he doing? Where was he? How had his life changed? They had talked about so many things, and his words had left a deep mark on her soul. He had suggested starting something new, but could she leave her family for something uncertain? Meanwhile, her world continued to turn. Alex asked her not to close herself off from him, but she couldn't respond, not knowing how she felt. The guilt washed over her again with renewed force. Every day with Alex felt more and more false, as if they were playing a role in someone else's play. But with James, suddenly realized that this meeting had returned to her a part of herself she had been missing. It was becoming harder. The fear of destroying her family clashed with the feelings that had been reignited. She didn't know what would happen next, and she couldn't find the answer to the question: what was more important, duty to her family, or the freedom she felt when she was once again with the person who had once been her everything? The more Dorothy thought about her actions, the stronger the internal conflict became. On one hand, she couldn't ignore her feelings for James. On the other, there was her duty to her family and children. Every morning began with agonizing thoughts. She wondered if she could continue living with Alex, knowing that memories and feelings tied to James still lived within her. The passion and attachment to her first love battled with her responsibilities and obligations. She often woke up in the dark, trying to clear her mind of the images from her meetings with James. These memories wouldn't let go. They returned in moments of silence. When she was alone with herself, his face, his voice still seemed so familiar, yet at the same time, new. She couldn't understand why this meeting had such a strong effect on her. Maybe it was the magic of the time when everything felt possible. Or maybe the encounter had awakened something forgotten, something lost over years of mundane life. Dorothy tried to focus on the present in Alex, on the children, but the more she tried to forget James, the more his image haunted her. She caught herself returning, over and over, to the moments when they walked through the city streets at night, talking about life, the future, unaware that their paths would soon part. Those feelings seemed so vivid, so real, that she couldn't ignore them. Her inner world became darker with each passing day, as if she were caught between two worlds. One was her family, her familiar life, where she was a loving wife and mother. The other was James's world, the world of her past, filled with unresolved emotions and dreams. And every time she looked at Alex, her heart squeezed with guilt. He didn't deserve this. He was a good husband. He loved her, and his trust was sacred to her. But despite that, her soul couldn't let go of James. Each day, Dorothy felt her world growing more polarized. She couldn't find a balance between her duties and her emotions. Her attitude toward her family began to fade, as if she were becoming a spectator of her own life, rather than an active participant. It felt like she had lost the ability to fully enjoy the moments with her children and her husband, as though there was only space for emptiness and memories in her life. One evening, after Alex went to the garage to fix the car, Dorothy was alone with the children, but her thoughts again returned to James. She sat her day in the kitchen, trying to focus on household tasks, but all she could think about was their last meeting. She saw his eyes again, heard his voice, felt the warmth of his hands when they stood together on the old bridge. The what-ifs wouldn't leave her. What if she had made a different choice? What if they hadn't parted ways back then? What if she had found the courage to start over? In moments like these, she felt her heart breaking between what she should do and what she truly wanted. She couldn't find a solution, and the scariest part was that she didn't know what she wanted. Did she want to return to those times with James, or was she just looking for a way to break the routine of her life? But despite all this, she understood one thing. She couldn't live in this state forever. Her inner conflict had become too painful to ignore. She knew that sooner or later, she would have to make a choice. But at that moment, sitting in the kitchen with the children playing in the next room, she didn't know what that choice could even look like. Every day, Dorothy felt an increasing weight in her heart. She couldn't escape what she had experienced with James. Meanwhile, her family demanded her attention and care. The temptation was strong, and thoughts of returning to what she had with James wouldn't leave her. She stood at a crossroads to preserve stability and loyalty to her family, or risk everything to relive the forgotten moments of passion and youth. One evening, as Alex came home from work, Dorothy felt that the moment had arrived. She could no longer live in this state of uncertainty. Thoughts of James haunted her, while Alex's kindness and patience only increased her feelings of guilt. She knew that tonight, this conversation could change their lives forever. Alex noticed her attention as soon as he stepped through the door. He silently placed his bag down and approached her, noticing how she shifted nervously from foot to foot, unable to start the conversation. "Dorothy," he said quietly, "something's wrong. You're distant again. I can see you're thinking about something important." Dorothy sighed and, unable to hold back, looked him in the eyes. "I need to tell you something, Alex. I can't keep living this lie. I ran into James again, the one I loved before. We talked. I can't just forget what was between us. It all came back." Alex frowned, his face instantly palling. He took a step back as if trying to distance himself from her, as if she were some dangerous, toxic substance. "What are you saying?" His voice was low, as though he already knew the answer but didn't want to believe it. Dorothy felt her chest tighten. She knew her words would hurt, but she couldn't take them back now. "I can't ignore what I feel, Alex. I can't be with you if my thoughts keep pulling me back to James. I can't keep living in this vicious cycle between duty and what I feel." Alex was silent, but the pain in his eyes was clear. He stepped closer, but now his gaze was cold, like steel. "You're saying I don't matter to you, that everything we build means nothing?" Dorothy shook her head, unable to tell him that it was exactly like that. Though her heart was torn into pieces, she understood that her feelings had changed, that their life was no longer the same as it was before. But the thought of losing everything, her family, Her children tore her apart. "I'm not saying you don't matter, Alex. You're an important part of my life. You're the father of my children. But I can't keep pretending nothing is happening. I can't keep living with this feeling inside." Alex abruptly grabbed her by the shoulders, his fingers tightening as if trying to hold her in place. In his eyes, there was a fire-raw mix of rage and sorrow. "You want to go to him," he said with such contempt that Dorothy felt her soul freeze. "You're willing to destroy our family, to return to old memories that may have lost their value long ago. Is this really what you want?" Dorothy couldn't answer. Her mind was in turmoil, each voice pulling her in a different direction. She could justify herself, explain that it wasn't so simple, that she, too, was suffering, that she needed time to understand what to do. But all of that seemed like empty words in this situation. The answer was clear: she had chosen James, and with that choice, she had to live. "I can't go on, Alex." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I need to be honest with myself." Alex shoved her away, as if he could no longer hold her, as if he could no longer be with the woman who had shattered their life. "If you want to leave, go. But know this, Dorothy, you will destroy everything we had. You ruin our families, our life, and then, maybe, you realize it was all a mistake." Dorothy didn't know what to say. She stood there, torn between guilt and the need to be honest with herself. She knew her choice was cruel, that she was destroying everything she had built over the years, but she couldn't stay imprisoned by her feelings. I don't know what comes next, Alex," she said, stepping back, "but I can't keep living, deceiving myself." Alex silently looked at her, his eyes full of pain and disappointment. He didn't say another word, just turned away, signaling that her decision was final for him. Dorothy, unable to hold back, broke down in tears and left the house, feeling like her present was crumbling around her. Dorothy couldn't answer. Her mind was in turmoil, each voice pulling her in a different direction. She could justify herself, explain that it wasn't so simple, that she, too, was suffering, that she needed time to understand what to do. But all of that seemed like empty words in this situation. The answer was clear: she had chosen James, and with that choice, she had to live. "I can't go on, Alex." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I need to be honest with myself." Alex shoved her away, as if he could no longer hold her, as if he could no longer be with the woman who had shattered their life. "If you want to leave, go. But know this, Dorothy, you will destroy everything we had. You ruin our families, our life, and then, maybe, you'll realize it was all a mistake." Dorothy didn't know what to say. She stood there, torn between guilt and the need to be honest with herself. She knew her choice was cruel, that she was destroying everything she had built over the years, but she couldn't stay imprisoned by her feelings. I don't know what comes next, Alex," she said, stepping back, "but I can't keep living, deceiving myself." Alex silently looked at her, his eyes full of pain and disappointment. He didn't say another word, just turned away, signaling that her decision was final for him. Dorothy, unable to hold back, broke down in tears and left the house, feeling like her present was crumbling around her.